Those alternative institutions you're talking about setting up and stuff too, I feel like international support by similar institutions would probably be a really necessary thing.
That's actually a huge potentiality that we also need to think about.
Fight the government, you know what I mean? I don't know if people can fight that battle alone.
Well, that's another thing we need to talk about is the linking of movements across borders. Like, we need to be linking mass movements in other countries together to provide international solidarity. I mean, that's the only way we're going to deal with these issues.
Well, and I think...
And this is a global issue. So the possibility of international mass movements is going to come up.
Exactly, but I guess I see it, the international thing, obviously, yes. Yeah. But I also think that it can be national solidarity, too.
For sure.
I think that's... and I guess...
It'd be a great start.
And that's what I mean. I'm more worried about that. I think the international thing is if we get enough national solidarity on it somewhere in the United States, at least they can start saying, well, at least part of the United States figured their shit out. Because right now, all over the world, they're like, the United States does not have their shit together. Period.
Has more credibility for international support and stuff like that too. Right, exactly. That's a great point. Yeah,
that's a really good point. I do think forming international ties as quickly as possible is really important, especially as we're seeing a sort of like international like fascist movement developing. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're seeing, authoritarian right-wing movements start to link up. I mean, we're about to start talking about Brazil. So Steve Bannon, who was, Trump's main advisor for a long time, he went to Brazil to give campaigning advice to a literal fact. I mean, this dude Bolosarno has said he's okay with killing 30,000 people in Brazil if they have to. Like, this is a straight... He said he wants a dictatorship, to go back to the dictatorship. Wow. I mean, this is a straight-up fascist.
Yeah, he wants to rid the country of communists, and he's attacking the media, trying to get the media outlets closed.
I was just going to ask, like, what are his, like, stances and stuff?
Oh, boy.
Sometimes they're okay for a while, sometimes.
A democratically elected fascist is, like, one of the most ironic things.
But it wasn't... we'll get into it. Because, I mean, they...
Let's get into it now.
All right, let's get into it. Okay. So, I've been following this for a couple years, actually, the developments in Brazil. The best reporting on it has been done by The Intercept. They have one of their headquarters is in Brazil. And Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept lives in Brazil. So, that's why they're so focused on it. So essentially, Brazil's democracy is only about 33 years old. They had a hardcore U.S.-backed dictatorship before that, coming out of the Cold War. And so they formed a democracy. They had a really popular left-wing president, Lula, I think his name, Lula. And he's essentially a Bernie Sanders type. So New Deal style progressive policies.
Yeah. Why would we be so invested in backing a dictatorship there? It's like a lot of resources there, like they're the Amazon or something.
So
like
during the Cold War, we backed. That's a big part of it, and we'll get to that part of it as well. One of the things Bolosarno's talked about is opening up the Amazon to massive corporate investment and development, which has been said, especially with the recent climate report, to be absolutely disastrous.
Yeah, that's one of our lungs. It's one of the world's lungs.
Lula.
We can live off
Lula da Silva,
right?
Or is it only
2003 to 2011?
So
I forgot that you can only
Lula da Silva,
money, right?
Lula da Silva had really high approval ratings. He was very popular. Mm-hmm. The woman who became president after him,
Dilma Rousseff.
Yeah. So she was pretty popular too. She actually was tortured during the dictatorship. Wow. That was one of like her big things she was known for. So she compromised with the business forces that had been. So it was essentially business forces were dominant during the dictatorship. It was the dictator plus business forces. So she made a compromise with business forces. And her vice president was like their person, Michael Tamir. So during her presidency, they managed to impeach her on what's considered trumped up corruption charges, especially given that Michael Tamir got outed as being involved in like absolutely massive corruption scandals, and there was no blowback at all for that.
And he was president after her.
Yeah, so they imprisoned, they got her out, they impeached her. He became president, one of the most unpopular leaders they've ever had in their country. And then this recent election's coming up, and so Lula da Silva runs again, because he's still really popular, and he was like, that's a coup. Yeah. So I'm going to get back in power. So he's running again. He's at the head of the polls. And they throw him in jail, again on trumped up corruption charges. And in jail, they don't allow him to speak from jail. So he can't be involved in the election. And now once he's in jail, his successor has no name recognition. He's got to start climbing up in the polls. And then all the business community, which owns all the mainstream press in the country, backs Bolosarno because he says he's going to give them a bunch of gifts to big business. And he is an outright fascist. I mean, he was talking in Congress to a congresswoman, and she was like accusing him of supporting rape. And he said, I wouldn't rape you because you don't deserve it.
Oh, my lord.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. He said we should either expel or kill all the former slaves because they're not good genetic material.
Oh my god.
He said the way you deal with gay people is you just beat them real hard if your son starts acting a little gay and they'll change their behavior. I mean, this is a fucked up dude.
Jesus. I mean,
no.
That's all I was wanting. That's all I wanted.
So, in response to him getting elected, John Bolton, who's the main security advisor for Donald Trump, said, we're happy to see like-minded leaders arising in the South.
Jesus.
He's working closely with Donald Trump, who congratulated him on his victory because he's going to let American big business into the Amazon. He's starting to call out the media as fake news. And so he's using the language Donald Trump uses, but for far more extremist reasons. And 2 days after his election, forces from his government went into schools all across the country and were pulling material on the dictatorship and on fascism out of schools.
What the shit?
I mean, this is crazy. This is some crazy shit.
That's just... How is that not, like... Is that blown up? I don't know. I mean, I've seen a couple...
It blows up if you're paying fuck attention, but not in mainstream media. You know what's crazy, too? When it happened...
That's blowing up!
When it happened,
yeah.
Business press, so like Financial Times and places like that, all they posted was stock markets in Brazil go through the roof after Bolosarno victory. So they're hailing it as like a positive business development.
God. And no one knows anything about him.
Very little. You'd be lucky to find an average American who knows what's happening in Brazil. I promise. Bolsonaro. That's really ironic, too, because during the election, someone stabbed him in the chest with a knife, trying to assassinate him because they were so afraid of him, and they fucked it up. He survived, and his polls went through the roof after it.
Of course.
It humanized him.
Yeah.
And then he used it as an excuse not to participate in any debates going forward.
Jesus.
Interesting.
Great.
Yeah, so...
Wow. Well...
I mean, I don't even know, like...
It's just depressing.
What to say other than yikes.
Yeah.
And I would be very interested to see how people would react to hearing that. Like, if it was widespread, what the polls would be like. I would just be interested if people actually would give a shit. I don't know.
Well, let's just also articulate. I mean, this demonstrates that big business would prefer an outright fascist to a social democrat.
Yeah, I mean, as long as the numbers go up, right? That's literally what it's
So,
like.
I mean, everything we're talking about with climate change, I mean, these people have no moral compass. It's just money. It's just money and power. So we should not be surprised about climate change. We should not be surprised about their actions with climate change any more than we should be surprised by their actions in Brazil.
They still want more rich, powerful people in control into the future, though, right?
But they only think in the short term.
They don't know what that means.
They must want to preserve a hierarchy of power somehow. There's got to be something to that idea.
They don't know how longevity works on planet Earth.
All of them? I mean,
they are willing to cut down the Amazon rainforest.
Some of the powerful families are also smart too. I mean, it's not like they're all mindless, businessmen.
For sure. But the irony is the most long-term calculated action that one of those people could make if they're looking to sustain their power into the future would be New Deal policies. Because that would make it sustainable. It'd make it stable. It'd make it less likely to be overthrown by your population. You have to give them enough to make it so it's not going to cause this instability. That's the thing, is there's the system's incentives and the psychological nature of these clapped out ruling elites that just perpetuate themselves is that they eventually just fucking don't give a shit.
But I mean, but because of their disconnection with like most people, like those types of people that they're giving those things to, I mean, I feel like that also blinds them to those ability to like utilize those resources better than they expected they could too. You know, so I mean, as far as like getting them to overdo it in a sense, you know what I mean, kind of thing.
It's the difference between like just raw venal self-interest versus enlightened self-interest.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about, you brought up the idea of it, like, them being intelligent. I have no problem saying that these people are intelligent, but that doesn't mean that they know how the world works, because they're not listening to the people who study how the world works.
Well, also say that some of them might also be wise enough to try to preserve...
I don't think they're wise.
There's got to be some.
There's certainly some.
That are also very powerful too. I'm just saying,
I mean, if we're gonna go in, we're gonna talk about what, Bill Gates, and we're gonna talk about
I don't know.
Well, there was actually a recent article in The Guardian that analyzed the political activity of billionaires in the United States, and it showed that people like Bill Gates, like liberal billionaires, was like a super small amount of them, and the vast majority were like just like trying to repeal Social Security, just like raw like conservatism to the max.
Which we look at that and we say, is that wise? And we say no. And
then,
I mean, Social Security is a shit show. So
true, but the reasons there's
so.
literally that's fair, but like I mean. Like, they just
I was thinking social policies in general.
Yeah, all of their policies are trying to repeal anything that supports the general population. I mean, after the New Deal, there was a whole ideological section of the business community that made it their entire mission to repeal anything done during the New Deal. Because they saw it as an intrusion on their dominance over society.
Totally.
And I think that is the ideological... roots of the ruling class we have today.
Totally. Which again, when we look at what the New Deal did for the country, we see that
it's just raw class warfare.
Things.
They want to be the masters. It's raw class warfare.
Which I don't think is wise.
Chomsky says it really funny is they are Marxists, they're the original Marxists. They have reversed values from Marx. Marx just noticed them and created a